Hunger in America is not a question of having enough food. Like, there is plentiful food in the United States. We're sitting here in California. We're not far from the Central Valley. There is copious food. It's a crisis of affordability, and it's a crisis of access.
Thank you all so very much for being here. Dr. Corey Jackson, I serve as the Budget Subcommittee Chair for Human Services that covers issues such as CalFresh, as well as our food banks throughout the state of California. We have today a very, very, very knowledgeable panel who are in their own right experts in trying to find ways to make sure that people have the food that they need to be able to thrive. And so first, we're just going to do a question for all the panelists. And obviously, food insecurity has been a relevant topic now more than ever. To start, could each of you share the role you and your organization play in this space, and what are the biggest opportunities for improving how many people are receiving assistance from CalFresh, and how much it can help the people who are enrolled in the program? And we'll just go down the line here.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's an honor. I don't think it's a controversial statement in this room to say that there's virtually nothing more fundamental and basic than making sure that people have enough food on the table. It's basic, it's fundamental, along with having a roof over your head. And it's really an honor to be with panelists who are at the forefront of that fight, and to be, frankly, in a room full of people who are in that fight too, in a whole variety of capacities, from volunteers to donors to service providers, the policy sphere, and everything else. You might be wondering, this is a serious topic. These are serious people. What is this guy at DoorDash doing on this panel? It's Friday night. Like, there are a lot of meals that need to be delivered throughout the San Francisco Bay Area.
Mine is on the way, actually.
Thank you for your service.
Arrives on time.
And I before I joined DoorDash, I would have had the same question. But what I have learned is that DoorDash is it's really a mission-driven company, and our mission is to grow and empower local economies. And you can't do that unless people have food on the table. And I'm really proud that we as a company have been in this fight for a number of years in a couple of primary ways. One, I'll sort of reserve talking about to later, but it's a project called Project Dash, where DoorDash powers delivery of food boxes, good, nutritious food, to people's doorsteps in partnership with food banks and food pantries around the country. And the other major initiative that we've had underway over the last couple of years, as our business has diversified from restaurants to really becoming the e-commerce and delivery channel for every type of local business, is getting SNAP onboarded onto the platform. Hunger in America is not a question of having enough food. Like, there is plentiful food in the United States. We're sitting here in California. We're not far from the Central Valley. There is copious food. It's a crisis of affordability, and it's a crisis of access. And a lot of what we can do on DoorDash is help reduce barriers to access. And that's really the SNAP story. So we've spent a lot of time, energy, resources over the last several years going through the sort of Byzantine, time-consuming process of getting virtually each of the grocers on our platform enabled for SNAP. And I think there's good reasons that you've got these regulations in place in the federal government, well-intentioned, but it makes the process very slow. But we've gotten through it, and now about 35,000 stores around the country on our platform are SNAP enabled, about 2,400 of those in California. And the importance of this is underscored when you think about the fact that 20% of people across the country say they can't get to a store where they can use their SNAP benefits. So the work that you've been leading to make sure that California progresses down the path to making sure that everybody in California who qualifies can get their SNAP benefits is one massive piece of the puzzle. But there's another big piece of the puzzle, which is once you've got those benefits, you've got to be able to use them. And 2.4 million people have now ordered SNAP on DoorDash. about 230,000 people in California, and we need to keep on investing in this area to make sure that not only can you get the benefits, but you can actually use them to put food on your table.
Thank you for that. Eli?
Great. Appreciate being on this panel so much. My name is Eli Zegas. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Fullwell. We're based here in California, and we work on policies that advance health, justice, and sustainability as it relates to food. And specific to your question, I think the way we think about food insecurity is that there are 4 main barriers to healthy food access. One of them is what you just described as physical access. Can someone find healthy food? For most people, the answer is yes, they know where to find it. Certainly for some people, they can't get there or it's too far. The second barrier is even if you know where to find healthy food, can you afford healthy food? And I'll get back to that in a second, and I think that's really what CalFresh is primarily about. The third is you know how to make a healthy choice, you know how to cook. So it's sort of an educational knowledge barrier. And then the last is probably the toughest one, which is a barrier of do you want it? You might be able to find, afford, and you know how to choose or prepare healthy food, but do you want it? And the best example of that is like a kid at school probably always opt for the pizza over the carrots and hummus. So that one's a cultural barrier, a difficult one on demand.
Not just kids.
Just okay. That's the one I think we can all relate to.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, not trying to name names. So what research shows is that for most people, the biggest barrier to being food secure is affordability. Like you said, it's money. It's having enough money. It's really tied to poverty. And so CalFresh, SNAP, the food stamp program is what we used to call it, is about providing people with money so they can afford the food that they and their family need. And in California, historically, we did a poor job of enrolling everyone who could benefit from this program. And I will say the thresholds are set by the federal government. What you can earn in order to be on CalFresh is the same in Mississippi as it is in San Francisco. That's just how the federal rules work. So there are a lot of people, and we can talk about this later, who make too much to qualify but are struggling day by day here in the Bay Area and across California especially. But for those who could be eligible, there's a lot more we can do to enroll people to that question, and I think we'll dive into it a little bit more. And so I would say that's thinking about broadening the safety net so it catches more people, making sure the people who do it, and importantly for this conversation, those benefits are funded by the federal government, or at least they are today. We could talk about that soon. Those benefits are funded, and so the state, in trying to address hunger, can really draw down a lot of money, or the individuals by enrolling get money in their pockets that is then spent to address hunger, and the state's role is facilitating that happening, but not funding the benefits themselves. The second thing, though, is in addition to catching more people, is raising the floor and the ceiling of how much money people get so that the benefits themselves do what we need them to do, which is reduce hunger and improve health. And so they're, in this conversation, hoping we talk about both how to broaden the safety net, enroll more people so it catches more people, and also so that it prevents people from falling so far, or rather like helps support people more so they can live their life and not be hungry.
Thank you. And Congressman, obviously, you are in the heat of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone saw you on TV recently about the negotiations that are going on when it goes to the federal government. And, of course, CalFresh is being talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about what you have heard and your thoughts about CalFresh?
Well, in contrast to Max and Eli, I represent the private sector and nonprofit sector doing extraordinary things to help millions of Americans who are struggling with food insecurity. I'm part of the public sector, and in Congress, we're doing everything we can to undermine those efforts. I'm the Grinch here on this panel. We just endured a marathon budget session last week of lots of late night votes and amendments. I think Democrats submitted about 300 amendments to a horrible reconciliation bill. That every one of those amendments were voted down. And in the dark of night, we voted, and by a single vote, what has emerged is a budget bill that will eliminate $300 billion support for supplemental nutrition assistance program aid that is critical for every state in the country. In California, it's about a $12 billion program a year, entirely federally funded. The equivalent cut would be about $3 billion a year. So it's literally a quarter of the money to California to give you a sense of the magnitude and impact. And there are widely varying estimates about how many people are going to be impacted by this, but as many as 18 million children. If we're thinking about school lunch programs, and we know how essential those are. While they will give you uplifting news and wonderful insights about what we can do together, I'm basically Debbie Downer here. Yeah.
Well, certainly we know that California has been really working to strengthen CalFresh over the years, making sure that we're incentivizing Californians to get more fruits and vegetables, making sure that the minimum amount that you can get from CalFresh is raised, so that people, no matter where you stand, can actually get something that really makes a difference, right? And then, of course, we've been trying to get to the point where we can even add CalFresh to our undocumented brothers and sisters in California. But certainly we know for sure, along with CalFresh, obviously when you talk about food insecurity, that there's still that missing middle who don't qualify for CalFresh, but are food insecure. Their housing prices are going up, their utility prices are going up, their insurance is going up, right? Which means now they have less money to be able to look for food, which is why also the money that we use to support our food banks are also important, because we are at a historic high in terms of the demand that our food banks are experiencing. The contradiction is California is now officially the fourth largest economy in the world. But as our economy has expanded, it seems like suffering is also expanded. And how can those two exist, right? And which is why there's no excuse why food insecurity is existing in California. So understanding that there is much to improve on systemically, and that there are opportunities for those in different sectors to collaborate cross-functionally, I'd like to propose the next question to Max. There's a lot of talk about public-private partnerships at the moment. How can private sector come in and bring value to improving food security?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that we think a lot about. I think we need to feel a real sense of urgency in this moment. And I think if we approach this moment with a real sense of urgency, we can find opportunity. We saw that happen in the pandemic, and I'd argue despite Congressman Liccardo's best efforts and those of his colleagues, I think we need a plan for a scenario where there's going to be a dramatic reduction in the amount of food assistance that people across the country, including here in California, are going to receive. And that's an emergency, and we need to treat it as one. But good things can come out of emergencies. And I think, the pandemic was obviously devastating in a whole host of ways. But one of the things that we saw during the pandemic is that private organizations, nonprofits, government, all of us in our own lives found new ways of doing things. And in a lot of instances, those are things that have really stuck. And I think Project Dash, which I referred to before, is an example of that. The food bank, Tanis is here tonight, leader of the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, is the innovative food bank in the country that is constantly looking for ways to serve people in better ways that literally meets them where they are by doing things like Project Dash or pop-up pantries or new initiatives like community markets that are bringing food, if not to people's doorsteps, then much closer to their doorsteps than that food otherwise would have been. So Project Dash is one of these pandemic innovations. It existed actually prior to the pandemic, but it was about, hey, there's leftover food at restaurants at the end of the night. There are food banks and food pantries that can use that food. Let's try to match it. And that was kind of going okay we talk in business about product market fit. There was maybe a little bit of product market fit, but it wasn't like a boom scenario. And then the pandemic hit, and then all of a sudden not the literal phone, because we don't have phones at DoorDash. It's very confusing for people to try to figure out how to get in touch with us. But like the phone started ringing off the hook. Hey, we need to serve our clients in a new way because no longer can we expect people to come to the food bank. Instead, we need to reach people who are sheltering in place, who have fragile immune systems, et cetera. We've got to serve them at their doorstep. And so Project Dash pivoted in partnership with food banks and food pantries. And the new model of Project Dash is Dashers show up and drop off box after box after box of good, nutritious food to oftentimes seniors in cities around the country and rural areas and suburban areas. And that new model sprang from the pandemic. And that's not exactly well, in some ways it is a public-private partnership. It's a private nonprofit partnership, but some of the funding that the nonprofit gets is from public sources. So I think it fits the bill. And today, cumulatively, DoorDash has powered the delivery of 125 million meals across the country, 10 million of those with a food bank here in San Francisco. And we've got to approach this moment in the same way. Like, let's figure out what are the new delivery systems? What are the new sources of funding that we can create? How can we take advantage of the tariff environment? Maybe that actually creates a moment of opportunity, as it did in the last Trump administration, to get nutritious food for less money and make sure that then we have a way to distribute it. So I'm not sure that I know all of the answers, but I think we have to take this moment on like the emergency that it is and find the silver linings that can hopefully help us continue to make progress against this problem.
You know, there's also been some great success when we talk about working with our farmers and making sure that schools can now partner with farmers to get more nutritious farm nutrition from the farms to our schools. And of course, we probably should continue to think about how can we make sure that we create those partnerships between farms and food banks, right? Farms and making sure that farmers are actually interested in collaborating with our prison systems to make sure that they're able to get fresher food as well. And so certainly there's a lot of room to be done when we think about these type of partnerships. Now, Eli, you and your team are really represent the boots on the ground. I've certainly seen you in front of my committee whipping me into shape. And as you're advocating in California to improve food access and sustainability for all, so how can CalFresh better engage with underserved communities and different cultural populations, such as seniors, college students, and non-English speaking populations? And what ideas or strategies do you have for us on how to improve CalFresh to be able to impact hunger and health?
Great. So I think on the first part of the question about how do we better enroll people in CalFresh so people get the benefits that they need to the extent that they continue to be around. So California historically had one of the lowest participation rates of states around the country. Over the past 10 plus years, that has improved. We are now sort of in the middle of the pack. I think depending on the number, about 75, 77% of those who are eligible are enrolled, which means there are over 1 million households that are likely eligible and not receiving CalFresh benefits, which translates to about $2 billion a year, I believe, in benefits that are not flowing through households to help them put food on the table. And there's a great report called Lost Dollars, Empty Plates that gets into the math of this. So how do we connect people to the resources that they are eligible for so that they're not going hungry? And we have tried a lot of things and they have worked, but I would say we have a long way to go, especially relative to other states that have participation rates of over 90%, 100%. And New York does much better than us and has a lot of similar characteristics as us. And I think while we could talk specifically about strategies for each of those populations, I think the thing I want to offer today is we don't have California, the state, the money flows from the federal government to the state and then goes onto cards that people swipe. The EBT card is what it's called, a debit-like card for their benefits instead of paper food stamps anymore. But a lot of the action in terms of enrolling people, all of it happens at the county level. So California is a state where people go to county offices, they call them to fill out the paperwork to enroll. And there are some amazing people working at the county eligibility offices. There are some people doing hard work day in, day out in multiple languages, trying to reach out to people and respond to people who are having all sorts of situations. But taking a step back, those counties are not asked or expected to hit any sort of target in terms of reaching eligibility numbers. They are expected and dinged if they don't have too much money going out in the wrong amounts. Oh, there's a paperwork error and we issued too many benefits or not enough benefits, error rate. So the federal government cares a lot about that and they track that of what's happening in the state and the counties. But there is no similar process or structure set up to say, well, if your county is not enrolling at least this much, there's going to be consequences. Or there's an incentive. You get a carrot. You get more money to be more innovative when you do hit certain targets. And I would say until we start moving in that direction as a state and work with county partners to set some reasonable timeline for reaching certain targets, I don't know that we're ever going to get there. Because what we're relying on right now is people who are struggling to self-identify and go through a lot of hoops that we have tried to streamline. But unless the people on the other end are also incentivized to try and make it as easy as possible and get as many people enrolled while still being accurate, I don't know that we'll get there. So the state is too diverse to say this is the one strategy that we need to do for this population or that population. And I think there have been proposals. There was one back in about 2018-19 that would set targets for counties and then involve the state if the counties didn't reach that. It's controversial because it could be seen as an unfunded mandate and putting something on the counties that they're not prepared to do. So there needs to be a lot of conversation. But until we set that expectation that we as a state should not leave money on the table, and that's not just the responsibility of an individual or the single eligibility worker who meets them at the office, but the responsibility of the entire apparatus to think about how do we get more people who are eligible for these benefits to receive them. And it is on us, not just them, to make that happen. I don't know how we get to 100% in California because we have a long way to go.
Definitely quite a struggle when you look at to see how many vulnerable populations and the percentage of them that are eligible or not participating. It's just quite staggering. I think that many folks in this room, myself and Assembly Member Buffy Wicks, have been really working on trying to answer the question, who in the state is responsible for tackling food insecurity? And last year when we kept asking that question, everyone kept looking around, right? Because there wasn't one. And so fortunately we were able to get AB 518 done to finally designate someone that we can work with and talk to, collect the data, but not only that, we are working to make sure that they actually create that strategic plan. How are we going to get there? What are the benchmarks, as you were talking about, right? Because if it is not someone's responsibility, everyone keeps looking around, right? And many of us are tired of looking around.
And if I may, I feel like that bill and your effort sets the baseline. Where are we today and what is the potential we could be at? And I would be curious, in the conversations you've had, is there an appetite to say, okay, now that we have the baseline and where we are versus where we could be, let's set up the structure to hold people to some level of minimum performance?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Congressman, you have a wealth of experience at the local and now at the federal level.
Yeah, the wealth of experience at the federal level is about 22 weeks.
Really easy
I
weeks.
should warn you about that. Yeah,
It doesn't take long to figure that place out. As budget cuts to programs like SNAP have been or maybe potentially cut on the federal level, and of course in the context of California's food insecurity, you represent a very expensive place to live as well, and I'm sure you're hearing from your own constituents. What steps are you and your colleagues taking to address the type of disparities we've been talking about?
Well, I guess I'd like to be able to report there are steps being taken, but as you know, I'm a first-term member of the minority party, which biologists classify as the lowest form of human life on Capitol Hill. So we have lots of ideas about steps to take. Right now, all those steps are being taken backward. And I guess, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go here for just a moment.
Please.
I'll come back to something more positive, I promise. You know, in addition to all the cuts, which are obviously very severe, what I'm concerned about is the streamlining work that's being done that's very good and imperative because it accords with everything we know about behavioral insights over the last several decades about how it is you ensure that people who critically need assistance get it and stand up to take it because you've got to get red tape out of the way. You've got to make it easier. You have to remove stigma that is so common in our community. An awful lot of that is going to get even harder. That may be even more painful for local communities than the cuts themselves. Let me describe what I mean in this bill. And this bill isn't done yet, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But there are, for one thing, expanded work requirements. Most people who can work, who receive SNAP benefits, do work. But nonetheless, now we have the Republican bill expanded work requirements for folks between 55 and 64, additionally adults who have kids above the age of 7. So now we've got more paperwork to verify, and obviously in communities where work is hard to find, or we know if folks are struggling, they're in work that may be seasonal or ephemeral, then that's a real challenge. In addition, they put into the bill essentially a hyper-punitive measure against states for error rates. And what we know is, like any system, there's overpayments and underpayments, and that's the way it goes, and you try to minimize those, and that's why you have inspector generals, at least you do until Trump fires 17 of them. But you try to do everything you can to reduce that error rate. Well, they actually put in the bill penalties that would force greater and greater share of the state cost of SNAP if those error rates are higher. And so it's 5% at minimum, maybe as much as 25% of the total cost of SNAP will go on to states. And the challenge with those error rates is obviously if you have a hypersensitivity to making mistakes, you're going to have more red tape. You're going to have more forms, you're going to have more oversight, you're going to have slower processes, and that's exactly the opposite of what we need if we want families to get food. And then there are other challenges as well. Obviously, more restrictions, for example, as many as 250,000 legal immigrants are going to be prohibited now from getting SNAP. So more restrictions, more barriers, more red tape. So this is the great challenge, and it's kind of, you know, look, the Republicans have surprised us in various ways. I know in recent months under the cult of Trump, we're now pro-Russia. We're now pro-tariffs if we're a Republican. In addition to that, apparently we're pro-red tape. That is what has become of this, and Reagan should be rolling in his grave.
I mean, obviously, why are they even considering cutting CalFresh? Can you talk about what the reason is?
It's and let me just also say the war's not over, right? This bill is now in the Senate. The Senate will do whatever awful things it's going to do to the bill. And the good news is we think the Senate is going to change the bill, which means it's got to come back to the House again to vote. You remember, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. Okay, so that's where Bill is over, and the hope is, it only got by one vote last week, and so the hope is that whatever they do to change it will scare off enough Republicans, along with whatever we try to do, and stirring things up, that maybe we can scare off enough Republicans that are actually going to be forced to talk to Democrats before they pass a bill. That would be a nice thing, since that's how it used to work when you negotiated over budgets. Okay, so going to the question, why in the world would they do this? Well, the good news is all those kids that get pushed off of SNAP or CalFresh, they'll get good tax cuts. Because if you're an 8-year-old, you really need a tax reduction. The bill is something that essentially commits we have a president who basically painted his party into a corner by committing to extend a 2017 tax law, which costs about $3.8 trillion over 10 years, and then also promised additional tax cuts in all kinds of different ways. Obviously, most of those overwhelmingly going to large corporations and wealthy individuals. A total of almost $5 trillion in additional debts, by the way, that we're putting on our children and grandchildren. And they had to find a way to pay for it. They don't pay for it very well because most of it is going on the credit card. That means our kids. But a fair chunk of it is coming out of what they call agriculture, which means SNAP, as well as Medicaid. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. And so really the poorest are getting hit the hardest, even within the agriculture budget, which is, they basically define how much they're going to try to cut within each committee's jurisdiction. It's even more severe than we thought, because originally they said it would only be $230 billion, but then they came up with another $70 billion in agricultural subsidies they want to give large agribusiness. So now it's $300 billion that they have to compensate with and cuts the SNAP. So I'm sorry if this is getting tedious hearing all these numbers, but it is astounding just how bad this is. And obviously we need to do more to communicate to an awful lot of communities, because we know there are a lot of folks who need these food benefits, who rely on them every day in Republican districts. And so we're going to be doing our best to stir that up.
You know, one of the things that we learn, my master's and my doctorate in social work, is that bad things happen when people get in survival mode.
Yeah.
Bad things happen when you start getting into a state of crisis.
Yeah.
And that has ripple effects. Bad things happen when people get really hungry,
Yeah.
right? I mean, let alone when we saw in the pandemic what happens when you don't have enough toilet tissue, right? Some of you still have stacks of that in your closet. But I think the idea is that first, if we think that we're going to be promoting the health and well-being of people, the worst thing you can do is make sure that we take food, or the ability to have food available.
Can I jump in on this?
Sure.
And your point? Bad things also happen if we stay quiet while this is happening. And so here in the Bay Area, most of the delegation is on the right side and pushing back and would like to not be in the minority and have more power to do it. But probably everyone in this room knows someone, family or friends, who lives in the district of a moderate Republican, or someone who might be willing to be like, oh, on this one. And so what I would say is, there is a role for all of us, especially those who are not struggling to get by, to speak up and say what you said so spot on, that this is a bill that is balancing tax breaks that primarily disproportionately go to wealthy people on the backs of those who are struggling the most, specifically with SNAP and Medicaid. And that we as a country are giving up our obligation to address hunger so that more people can have, wealthy people can have money in their pocket. And members need to hear from their constituents, especially Republicans, that's not okay. There may be other things in the reconciliation bill they want, but pull that back. Take that out. And I've seen videos of Republicans saying, oh, these aren't cuts. And that's just not true.
Yep.
Like the Congressional Budget Office has analysis that will explain to you why it will end up in cuts. And so they'll say we're just working on waste, fraud, and abuse. But exactly like Congressman Liccardo said, there are very clear requirements on work that will kick people off. There are other cuts that will be sent to your committee. How are we supposed to, as a state, deal with this increased cost share we're supposed to have? California can't handle all that, especially with both Medicaid. And that will lead to people losing benefits because we will restrict eligibility to make our budget balance. And so I just say, if you know anyone in any state where they have a Republican member of Congress, start talking to them. Ask them to make that call, because this is one where I think it is enough on the fence that enough calls could start changing people's opinions, and probably focus on the House, because the amount of time we've got is call those House members.
Yep. That's great advice, by the way.
Well, certainly, I think that I think that the administration is very serious about waste, and I think that the question becomes really is about who is worthy for the federal government to invest in, and if they are not worthy, if a group of people are not worthy, then they consider that waste, right? Like, we need to think about this because government decides who's winners and losers,
Yeah.
who's worthy of winning, right? And who deserves to lose. And these trade-offs that we're talking about are really, we are talking about who's going to be the winners and losers in this process, right? So before we all get too depressed,
See, I was worried I'd do that to you.
we have our closing question on this. Is obviously we're facing increased challenges across a broad spectrum of issues, all relative to food, whether it's climate change, resource management, our population growth, questions of how we produce and distribute food in an accessible manner. With that in mind, what is, and this is a question for all of us, is what is your vision for the future of food sustainability and security in California, and even more broadly, the United States? Again, what is your vision for the future of food sustainability and security in California, as well as the United States? You know, I'm a firm believer, as you all are thinking about that answer to that question, is that when we consider programs like CalFresh part of our social safety net, that means you're providing people with the basics of what they need. So when we talk about California being the 4th largest economy in the world and the #1 economy in the world, many times we're always told, well, we can't afford something. But I'm done falling for that trick, right? We have the money. The question is, do we have the priority, right? And if we have the money, that means it is a policy decision to keep people hungry. So what does that future look like? Obviously, things like making sure that we continue to increase the minimum amount of support that people get when they qualify for CalFresh. Obviously, making sure that we open up and expand who is eligible for CalFresh, making sure that we continue to strengthen our partnerships with our food banks and our farmers, who are many farmers are on life support. But understanding the ecosystem and not working in silos, I think, is going to be the most important part as well. And then, of course, making sure, as we think about a no wrong door system here in California, so that if you qualify for one thing or you go to one office, you get to find out and you get signed up for everything you qualify for, right? Instead of this, okay, you got what you need here, now take another day off of work or find childcare, right? To be able to then go to yet another office. And hopefully it still is in your community, by the way, to be able to access everything that you need. Congressman, we'll start with you. What is your vision for the future?
You know, as I think about families that are struggling every day to pay their bills, there are some bills that are non-negotiable, like rent, and others that are more negotiable, like maybe I'll skip a meal. And we could do an awful lot for food security if we did an awful lot about just making sure this is an affordable place to live. So my vision is making sure that we actually do the job we need to do to produce enough homes in enough places, make them sufficiently affordable so that families are not forced into that horrible decision. I know this is not news to anybody, but food insecurity is a factor, the fact that people simply cannot afford all the other things that they do have to pay for. So I think obviously there's a bigger picture here. In the short run, while we're enduring this very dark moment and we're going to do everything we can to fight, obviously, what's happening in D.C. But if it should all come to pass, this is a moment for local leadership to really stand up, and state leadership, and I'm grateful for the leadership we have here in California. As I think about the pandemic when I was mayor, and I just saw the extraordinary things that were happening in our community. Years before that, we had, teenagers who were developing apps to redistribute food from convention centers and hotels and help distribute, which was amazing. So we actually built on some of that. We started an amazing program with young adults who were kicked out of their jobs during the pandemic to employ them in providing help both in the warehouses and in delivery to provide sort of a nonprofit DoorDash alternative. And we saw a community come together incredibly, at the time, the food bank, we're seeing more volunteers than ever and more donations than ever. It's going to take an awful lot of local support. We know that philanthropy is not going to fill the size of this gap. It's just the numbers don't work, but we're going to need to be more creative and more resourceful. And this is an opportunity in this crisis for us to see that kind of local leadership.
Eli?
I think I'll say the long-term vision first, which is, we don't have hunger in California, in the United States anymore, that people are not struggling to get by, and that we get there through two ways, one of which is sort of the private sector, that people are earning enough wages and their rent is not so high that they can afford the necessities. And then the second is what you were speaking to, Dr. Jackson, which is figuring out a way in which we take the wealth of America and we ensure that the basics are met for everyone. And that's a policy decision and used to be called redistribution of wealth. And I know that's not something people like to talk about a lot, but it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy that we have so many people hungry and that it is a policy decision that it's there. So those two combined, I think, gets us to a place where people have enough to afford what they need, either through their own income or through a safety net. In the shorter term, it's a vision where, our safety net is way more streamlined and requires less of people to do and more of the government and systems to do it. I think it is a little more, one of the things that came out of the pandemic as well is the federal government cut people checks. And it turns out that reduced poverty tremendously. And certainly there were probably some people who used that money for things that many people in this room would be like, really? That's what you used it for? But most people used it for their necessities.
Yeah.
And even if you have some people who aren't doing it in a deserving way, using that money and wasting it, relative to the amount of infrastructure you need to run our current safety net programs, there's an argument to be made that we should just move to giving people money in a quick, easy way and know that some of it may not get used in exactly the way we would all want it to be used. Mm-hmm. But the amount we save by efficiently getting people money and the amount we save people the hassle of having to enroll in 5 different programs and recertify every so often and show what their deductions are through lots of paperwork, all of that.
I'm going to stop patronizing them.
Yeah, if we can start trusting most people to use money and safety net funds in a way, so that's streamlining the safety net, so it's less about all the paperwork and all the systems and more like, you need money. Here's some money, and we know that not everyone's going to use it the way we want, but on the whole, on net, it's better than what we've got. I'd like us to move in that direction. And so that could be through streamlining specific programs. It could be guaranteed income. I know you hear a lot about that in your committee. And then also increasing the benefits, because especially in a place that's high cost where we are, raising that floor through minimum benefits, raising the ceiling through supplemental benefits for fruits and vegetables or otherwise, or just increasing benefits through state or federal policy. I'd like to see that as a midterm time horizon step towards a longer term where we've just rejiggered how we prioritize the wealth of the country.
Absolutely. Max?
I'm in the unenviable position of going last on this question with these co-panelists and this moderator, so I'll do my best. Agree with a lot of what's been said.
My food is on the way, so
Should have been here probably already. If we're being like that, is that your DoorDash counter up in the front?
Uber Eats.
Let's figure out what we can do here in California.
mm-hmm.
Dr. Jackson, you spoke to this. I mean, this is an incredible state. We're in an incredible city with an enormous amount of talent and ingenuity and innovation that's happening, and a lot of people who have a tremendous amount of heart and who believe deeply in California values. And I think the more that we can do in California on food insecurity and all the things that go along with it, affordable housing, access to health care. I mean, it's all part of an ecosystem, to borrow a word that you used. If we want to show that it can be done, let's show that it can be done. And we can all support our local food banks, and we can all mobilize for legislation that make sure that we are using every ounce of federal dollars that are going to come from DC. Let's make sure that we've got our overpayment and underpayment rate as close to zero as possible, so we maximize every dollar. And I frankly don't sit here with the expertise to know exactly how that can be done, but let's just all hands on deck treat this moment like the crisis that it is. And maybe just one more word is there are things happening that also, I think, give some cause for hope. Like, I think the food as medicine movement is a really interesting thing that's happening, and it's neither exactly right nor left. Like, our health secretary talks about making America healthy again and nutritious food, and I'm sure there are lots of opinions about our health secretary in this room, but like, where are those seams where we can actually find unexpected bedfellows? And really make some progress. And like, we're doing some work with Second Harvest, which is the food bank, I think, in your district, Congressman, with Cal AIM. So like, food as medicine, like, there's an insight like, oh gosh, if people have food to eat, they're healthier. And like, turns out that that's actually really good, because then health insurance companies, like, they save money. And so like, they're investing in this space. And I don't know if these Medicaid waivers will stick around, but these Medicaid waivers are really, really important. And that can connect people to healthy food that saves Medicaid money. And like, gosh, you would have thought that DOJ would be finding those kinds of opportunities. But I don't know, maybe we shouldn't give up yet on trying to find some of these seams that we can exploit. And maybe it's Pollyannish, maybe it's overly optimistic, but like, gosh, we got to try.
Let's not forget that we all have a role to play when it comes to ensuring that people get fed. And it is what others have said, and the founders of this country would say, is the most powerful title that we all have is that of citizen.
There you go.
And that if we do not speak up in this time, not just here in the Bay Area, but for those that are watching throughout California, that they have to do their part too. We all have to do our part. And making sure that the late Congressman John Lewis, what he would say is speak up and get in the way. So with that, let us all just commit ourselves to doing our part and to making sure that people, especially in a state like California and a country that we live in, do not have to worry about what they're going to eat from one day to the next. Let's give it up for our panelists. Congressman Liccardo, Max Riddick, and Eli Zegas. Thank you all very much for having us.